All right, I'm starting there. Hit the record button. Welcome everyone for the first set of 3 presentations on Cayuga Lake and water quality. And since time is short, we have 10 minutes for each of the presentations. We'll do 3 presentations and then do a Q&A. I welcome you to put your questions in the chat as we go through it, and I'll pull those into a separate document and read them off when we get to the Q&A at 10:20. All right, so Sam, we're seeing your PowerPoint. If you want to move it into speaker view.
Oh man, I know I do not have time for this. Sorry.
Oh no, you're fine. Or feel free to not move it into speaker view, but if you just want to like make your notes page really small, and maybe close, like roll up the the window.
I'm so sorry about this. Yeah, just for the sake of time, I'm just going to get going here. I can work with this. Can you still see my presentation?
We see it. It looks great.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you for having me, Darby. In the introduction, my name is Sam Beck-Andersen. I'm the Associate Director for Invasive Species Programs at the Finger Lakes Institute and the coordinator for the Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management. I'm talking today about invasive species in the Finger Lakes. So just to kind of give an idea of kind of the scope we're talking about, of course, there are a lot of invasive species in the Finger Lakes, so I'm just going to try to give a brief overview. I'm going to skip a little bit of the background here. We operate at the Hobart and William Smith Colleges. The Finger Lakes Partnership for Regional Invasive Species Management is a network of state, federal, local agencies, and other stakeholders that supports a diverse and comprehensive management plan of invasive species. So what we do is allow partners to kind of share and leverage limited resources, whether that be financial resources, expertise, guidance, and kind of everything in between to sort of support invasive species management broadly. The funding through the PRISM is through the New York State EPA, or Environmental Protection Fund, excuse me, and administered through the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So just again, with the 10,000-foot overview, I felt compelled to provide an overview of what is an invasive species. And an invasive species is one that is non-native and, of course, has to have some type of negative impact on either people, the environment, or the economy. Kind of all this sort of comes back to the people at the end of the day, but of course that environmental impact can be really significant as well. So this can be anything from affecting crops and agriculture to, reducing the amount, value of land or a home, for example, property values. And then all the way down to essentially actually affecting humans, so harming humans themselves. So invasive species invade landscapes. This is a couple of just really obviously extreme examples of invasive species across landscapes around the world. This is a good example of the characteristics of invasive species. They are able to reproduce very easily. They have very little natural predators typically, are extremely aggressive, and can create monocultures. So you see some examples of monocultures here, the kudzu in the south, water chestnut, I think this is in Florida, and then of course Japanese knotweed, but also happen at a smaller levels. And some of these examples really show, beyond the actual aggression and kind of rapid reproduction, they show just how aggressive these are and good at surviving invasive species can be. Invasive species and climate change is continuing to be more and more of an important part of the conversation when you're talking about invasive species. As climate changes, regional sort of habitats and kind of growing areas or reasonable habitat for invasive species or any species can change. So that can include an invasion or a species that maybe is finding a new habitat, like the southern pine beetle finding a new home in Long Island, or a native species and typically non-invasive species that is able to spread to new parts of a region as climate is changing, getting warmer, and becoming invasive. So an example of tall morning glory here. So again, as these things change, invasive species continue to take advantage of human disturbance. So that can take the form of a trail or, construction projects, and of course, climate change being a big part of that. So in the Finger Lakes, we have no shortage of invasive species. This is just a quick snip of IMAP Invasives, which is a statewide invasive species database. This is just invasive species observations since 2019. So obviously this database goes back to before the 70s. They have historical data that's included in that, but we have no shortage of this. This includes aquatic invasive species, terrestrial invasive species, plants, animals, and kind of everything in between. So theoretically, we only have so many staff and people that are actually going out there. So we're not, focused on everything. I just want to give, for the sake of the conversation, a couple of examples of what we are concerned about. Of course, talking about Cayuga Lake, no invasive species presentation would be complete without talking about hydrilla. Hydrilla is a very aggressive aquatic plant that can reduce native habitat and threatening invasive species and fisheries, but also has a really possible impact on recreation, water control, infrastructure, so on and so forth. Hydrilla has been known in Cayuga Lake since 2011, and the management of that continues. Our institution is a part of that management, as are a number of different important stakeholders in Ithaca and throughout the rest of the lake. Another invasive species, of course, that is of note, spotted lanternfly. This is a highly reproductive insect that feeds on a number of different crops. Of most concern in our area, of course, is the spread of spotted lanternfly and its possible impact to wineries. So what spotted lanternfly does is essentially feeds on plants and vineyards, specifically of grapevines, and apples, also relative to the Finger Lakes specifically. And it's actually not damaging the plants themselves. It's actually the excrement that the spotted lanternfly creates. That's called honeydew, and that honeydew causes mold that affects the ability for the host plant to reproduce and provide effective fruit and reproduction. Of course, hemlock woolly adelgid is a small aphid-like insect that affects hemlock trees and can cause a lot of problems to hemlock stands, which we have quite a bit of in New York State, and specifically. So really, what's at stake here? There's a lot of different things. This includes recreation, beach use, boating, commercial navigation, dredging, water supply. That's just hydrilla alone. This is talking about the Great Lakes. On the left here, we have a map of eastern hemlock populations. The hemlock is an extremely important tree species for water quality. So we're not just talking about humans here. We're not talking about the ability to go out and take your boat out. We're actually talking about reasonable and very real impacts that a major loss of hemlock could have on the ecosystem of the New York State, but also very specifically here in the Finger Lakes. And of course, we already talked about the possible impacts to vines. So managing invasive species can be complicated. I'm running out of time already. So just basically the concept here is that as invasions persist and progress over time, it becomes more and more expensive to control invasive species. There are all kinds of different management methods for invasive species that include prevention. That's the most affordable and kind of best bang for your buck in terms of managing invasive species, basically avoiding them getting there so you don't have to actually manage them at all. Of course, mechanical treatment, chemical treatment, and biological controls all sort of come into one as a sort of integrated management. So really multiples of these are required, and kind of iterative processes that focus on management are really important. We're not the only ones doing invasive species control. There's tons of conservation districts, land trusts, and so many more that are helping us and doing their own work, important work managing invasive species broadly. So just a couple of takeaway messages here, some great ways that kind of the public can help, but also groups like yourselves in planning native, as well as knowing and reporting invasive species. So kind of us expanding what we can do educating people to sort of help inform the invasive species and kind of where they are regionally really helps us actually have a grasp on managing them. So I know there was a whirlwind. I'm happy to continue to stick around and look forward to hearing the rest of the talks. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sam. I'm glad I didn't have to get out the hook already. So we're going to make a quick jump over to Liz Kreitinger from the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network yeah, we're seeing your
Great.
screen. Got it. And
Okay. Are you looking at just the slide?
we're looking at a slide. So
Great. Thanks. Okay. Hi, everyone, and thanks so much to the conference organizers for hosting this Cayuga Lake focused and watershed focused talk. I'm excited to tell you a little bit more about the work of our organization and highlight some of our programs today. The Cayuga Lake Watershed Network is a 25-year-old independent membership-driven nonprofit. And while I get to have the title of steward, there are, of course, many, many ways for everyone to be effective stewards of our watershed. And sometimes those opportunities are big and involve many stakeholder organizations, and others are small actions that you, your neighborhood, your communities can take to protect water quality, ecosystems, and people downstream. So my goal today is basically to get you thinking and excited about your own opportunities for watershed stewardship, whether you are from our watershed or you're from somewhere else. So simply put, our organization's mission is to advocate for the health of Cayuga Lake and its watershed in a changing world. And those changes to our watershed that our watershed faces come in many forms, including climate change, nutrient and runoff pollution, and invasive species. This is the triple threat. And in order to rise to that challenge, our vision is this network of individuals, institutions, and communities united in the protection of our region's water resources. Towards those goals, our work includes three important tasks: education, community engagement, and advocacy, and the first two are very critical to the latter. So while that mission, is short and might sound simple, of course, the work is not, which is why your role as stewards is so important. And just who is the network for a moment? So we are two staff members, myself and our program associate, members and volunteers, including businesses and organizations who recognize the importance of this shared mission. And beyond that, it's our engaged community around Cayuga Lake, and everyone who's interested in learning and participating in this conversation or through actions, even beyond our organization. And we work with many, many partners to deliver our stewardship programs. This is critical because watershed issues are so complex and cross many other scales and boundaries, and conservation commissions are a very important part of that network. So here you have it, our beautiful Cayuga Lake watershed and its creeks, streams, and subcatchments. We span 7 counties, 50 municipalities, 870 square miles, and there's over 140,000 people with many values and interests that vary across the watershed. So that's a challenge, but I would also argue that it's the opportunity. So water resource issues, of course, affect everyone, and everyone can contribute. So there's all these different values that people have relative to water that can inspire action. Watershed education and engagement is the foundation of our work, and we keep busy organizing 2 free community conferences each year, as well as timely events related to current issues and interests that we hear from our members and community. We maintain information-rich website, produce 2 to 4 newsletters, which are sent in as print to members each year with articles and updates, and maintain an active email list of over 1,000 people and share resources on social media. So we also provide and promote volunteer opportunities through the watershed-wide programs, which I'll give you a snapshot of today. And importantly, we do develop science-backed positions on and comments on issues facing our watershed. We are starting to pull together plans for our fall community conference that will happen later this year. Sessions will be held virtually and in Tompkins County, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Okay, I'd like to quickly move into some of our more specific stewardship programs in areas that might interest you. The Cayuga Lake Basin. In the Cayuga Lake Basin, there's more than 55 species of mammals, 150 species of breeding birds, including osprey and eagles, and the lake itself is home to more than 90 species of fish. And so we know that litter can be harmful to wildlife, especially if it contains plastics or other non-biodegradable materials. And that's why the Cayuga Lake Watershed Network has been collaborating with community groups to do litter cleanups for our waterways for over a decade. We work with churches, scout troops, community groups, and families to organize cleanup events along roadsides and waterways and ditches and drainages, which are, of course, waterways too, and keep trash out of the lake. So we can support groups by loaning out or providing supplies, including trash grabbers, vests, and assisting with coordinating disposal. And we also work to advertise, highlight, and share the work of these many volunteer groups who participate in order to foster this collective sense of watershed stewardship and inspire others to get involved as well. We have some new resources that we've developed this year, including a brochure and watershed map, which connect the idea of watershed stewardship directly to litter cleanups, which we can provide in print for your cleanup event, or even as editable digital files so that they can be adapted for use in other watersheds. We're happy to share. So if your Conservation Commission is interested in collaborating, I'd love to hear from you. Our flagship program for community watershed stewardship is our Lake Friendly Living program. Water flows from the top of the hills through our neighborhoods, farms, and urban centers and into Cayuga Lake. So along the way, that runoff is picking up nutrients, pollution, and other debris. So the at-home practices and daily decisions that everyone makes do have an impact on our watershed. And the Lake Friendly Living program is designed to teach people best practices that they can adapt, which will reduce surface water runoff and mitigate pollution. And it's not just us here in the Cayuga Lake watershed. We are a proud co-founding member of the Lake Friendly Living Lake Friendly Living Coalition of the Finger Lakes. This is a group of community-based watersheds and lake organizations from across the region working to amplify this message. And this year, the coalition celebrated its 3rd annual Lake Friendly Living Awareness Month in May. And the coalition also works together throughout the year on shared messaging. Each month, we've been sharing information related to best practices that individuals can take at home to protect our lakes. And anyone can also take the pledge and become a Lake Friendly Living champion. Join that coalition of watershed stewards from across Cayuga Lake watershed and the entire Finger Lakes region. And I want to emphasize that if you are thinking, oh, I already do a bunch of these things at home, I want to encourage you to still take the pledge and help spread the word and celebrate that commitment. We have resources that we can share with you to help you multiply your impact, including the Homeowner's Guide to Lake Friendly Living. And we can send you copies to share with friends, family, to help spread that message. So also related to Lake Friendly Living, in our region, climate change has already brought on warmer air and water temperatures, more frequent and severe storms, more frequent drought events. And in the coming decades, the winters are going to continue to become warmer with reduced snowfall and fewer freezes. The way that we respond to this change to mitigate climate change has implications for water quality. So to be effective stewards, our actions have to fall in these 2 categories under the umbrella of climate change: reducing greenhouse gases that contribute to it and mitigating climate change effects that are already present. So we've put together 2 informational booklets to guide Cayuga Lake watershed residents through climate smart and environmentally friendly home and living practices. These handbooks guide lakeshore and watershed residents through these actions in their homes and lifestyle. And we've nearly completed the updated second editions, which will be available online and in print soon. The last program I want to quickly highlight is the Cayuga Lake Harmful Algal Bloom Monitoring Program, especially because it comes with an alert. Under the right conditions, these populations of cyanobacteria can grow really rapidly in our lake, and multiple stresses, including nutrient pollution, climate change, and invasive species are contributing to these. In 2018, the Community Science Institute, Watershed Network, and Discover Cayuga Lake quickly responded to this threat and launched a great monitoring program, which I know Grace from CSI will talk more about later. But I just wanted to give you an alert because HABs have spiked in September, and especially the vast majority have been off the northeastern shoreline in Cayuga County. With that, I think I'm out of time. Here's my contact information. I hope you'll stay connected to our work. You can subscribe to our monthly e-news updates and follow us on social media for more. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Liz. Now we are going to send it over, if you can stop your share. Lisa Cleckner from the Finger Lakes Institute is up next and sharing her screen, and looks like you're ready to roll.
Is it actually sharing?
It is. Yep, you're sharing. If you want to try
Okay.
your presentation.
There we go.
Yep, you got
Okay.
it. Go for it.
Super. Okay, to round out the session, I am going to give a very brief introduction to the intermunicipal organization for the Cayuga Lake Watershed. Before getting into the intermunicipal organization, I just want to talk about the Finger Lakes and how important the lakes are to the economy. Tourism and agriculture are our two biggest economic drivers. And the lakes are really at the heart of this. And in addition to, the fisheries that the lakes provide, bassmasters, obviously the great vineyards and agricultural resources we have, I think, are world renowned. There are the non-monetized aspects of water that we all realize and have the opportunity to enjoy, including a lot of, in addition to, the actual being in the water, there's a lot of spiritual connections, a lot of cultural, a lot of history related to water. So keeping those in mind is at the forefront of, when I think about the Finger Lakes. So the watershed itself and the intermunicipal organization, as Liz just mentioned, 50 municipalities, 7 counties. It's a very complex watershed, and it's one of 11 Finger Lakes, and the main land use in Cayuga Lake is agriculture. The southern regions of the lake have very steep slopes, urban areas generally at the terminal ends, if you will, of the lakes. But the main land use is agriculture and small communities. So 50 communities, trying to get them to work together. There's a lot of clean water plans that are out there. So we know that we have some issues to address. How do we go about doing this? Since every municipality and every leader basically has a full-time job usually and is a municipal leader and probably is involved in 75 other organizations, I always say they have at least 3 full-time jobs. So the watershed manager role is to really help coordinate and to bring resources to bear to address water quality issues. In addition to the municipalities themselves, there's all of the departments, the municipal departments that go along with that, as well as we know getting access to state programs, county programs, nonprofits that we're working with, colleges, universities, and of course the landowners, which is really with watershed management. The first thing we need to do is look at what's happening on the land and how that impacts water. So it's a very complicated landscape, and the watershed manager really helps to do this. And the reason I'm talking so much about the watershed manager is I am not the watershed manager, but at the Finger Lakes Institute, we are the host organization for the Cayuga Lake Watershed Manager. And we are currently in transition with the watershed manager position, but I will talk a little bit more about that. So the big thing, so Erin Norris was the Cayuga Lake Watershed Manager as of August of 2022 through June of 2023. One of the things that that Aaron really focused on working with the Cayuga, with the COE, basically executive committee and the municipal leaders and all of the agencies in the watershed, was to work on implementation projects. Because again, working with communities, I think municipalities care about dollars, municipalities can go after resources, and people want to see implementation projects done so they can see changes in their backyards and, as they're driving to work and enjoying watersheds. And so Cayuga Lake is very blessed to have first of all, a great website through COE, but also the technical advisory committee, which has really helped to understand what projects could be done and to provide an assessment of these projects to help them become shovel ready, so that when dollars become available at many different places, that essentially COE is in a position to go after those dollars, and the watershed manager is really helping to round out that portfolio and to identify sources. And so kind of looking at the June 2023 report of Erin before she departed, there were a number of projects that were identified for action and for funding. And so I know the organization is looking to build moving forward on that. And, that aspect of the position, kind of just looking at how you can actually get these projects moving. It's very complicated, trying to match the funding sources along with finding the right champions in the community. And it's all about relationships and working with all the different stakeholders that we've already identified. And so, looking again across the Finger Lakes, we're looking at relationships. We're looking at where, essentially we're Cayuga Lake with its 50 municipalities and 7 counties. There's the 11 lakes themselves provide a wonderful networking opportunity for the watershed managers to work with each other, as well as to, basically work with partners such as the Regional Watershed Alliance to share ideas and best practices. A lot of the municipalities that we have in the Finger Lakes touch several lakes, so it only behooves us to have these individuals working together and to be coordinating and sharing information as much as possible. So I'm leaving the Cayuga Lake Watershed Manager position here with a help wanted sign. We are actively involved in a search, and we hope to have a new watershed manager on board soon, and look forward to having the new manager connecting again with all of our regional partners. So with that, it's, in addition to the watershed managers, obviously there's so many people. I just want to thank COE for their great slides here, for the individuals that participate in all of the committees, as well as the municipal leaders, and obviously all the organizations like Liz and Sam are previously presented, plus who's going to follow. It really takes all of us to share this information. And we look forward to having a new watershed manager on board soon to contribute to the implementation of projects for the health of Cayuga Lake in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. And welcome folks who joined lately. So I don't have any questions in the chat yet, so go ahead and put your questions in there. I can also, during this Q&A, we have about 10 minutes for that. I will allow you to unmute yourself if you just want to raise your hand, and we can call on you if you have a question to ask. I think, Liz, you were just fill in a minute here. You kind of got cut off in some of the HAB stuff, and I'm not sure if you know what all Grace is presenting later, but it was anything more that you wanted to add with the collaboration. I know that the network has with CSI and other groups on working on HABs.
Sure. Yeah. I should emphasize that because of, the partnership and the leadership of the Community Science Institute, that our lake does have one of the most comprehensive HABs, data sets in the state that not only looks at HABs occurrence and composition of those blooms, but also the toxicity. And we're able to provide, push out that information very quickly. So when the volunteers, which I'm sure Grace will get into a little bit how that process works, but they get the samples to CSI, and the information goes up on their very cool new HABs database as soon as it's analyzed in the lab. And weekly, what the Watershed Network does is we push out HABs newsletters. And that has all the, bloom information from the past week. And this happens throughout the summer. We push out these updates by email so folks can subscribe to that if they want to get, the information delivered, little weekly summaries directly to them. But we are also trying really hard to emphasize in those newsletters the good work that's being done and the important steps that are being taken, and some of the projects, that the COE's intermunicipal organization works on, work by partners. I know we highlighted the project that Andy Zepp's going to be speaking about later at the Van Riper Preserve, because there's so much good work being done. That's one of the really, important questions we get in response to the HABs newsletters sometimes is like, thank you for the information, but, what's being done? What can be done about this? And the answer is like many projects are being worked on and there's so much good work being done, but we need to do more, right? Because we need to give the lake every, opportunity and chance it has to be resilient to these bigger stresses of climate change, and by reducing pollution anywhere we can, and runoff throughout the watershed. We're taking steps in that direction.
Great, thanks. I'm gonna hold on a second, Tad. I've got a question came in from Ingrid for all the speakers that just rolled out of my view. If you could share only one message, and we'll make it the one message, one sentence message with our friends and neighbors about protecting water quality, what would it be? And I'll just randomly call on you, Sam. Go ahead. What's your one sentence message about protecting water quality?
Sure. I think this might be a bit of a cop out, but I think reasonably, I would say get involved. I think there's a ton of great resources and opportunities for the public to not only learn about what's important in their local watersheds, but also to actually get involved and support what's happening, whether that's volunteering your time in a citizen science program or doing a water chestnut pull or attending a meeting or being on, something advisory group or something like that for any number of these different initiatives. When you're talking about water quality, I would say that encompasses the most without kind of favoring one specific issue, maybe.
Great. Lisa, yours has to be shorter than Sam's. This was more than one sentence.
It takes time.
True. We know that. Yes. Time and patience. So to patience, be patient. All right. Liz, what do you have?
Okay. So we're similar to Sam. There's stewardship opportunities for everyone, given your unique role, resources, and interests. So please reach out, and I'm happy to help you find where to get involved.
Great. And as someone who wears 15 different water organization hats, yeah, get involved because we only have so much energy. Tad, go ahead. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question.
Sure. Yeah, it's a quick question, maybe it's better in the chat or something. But anybody have any experience with any of the waterless boat washing systems? I was at a Lake Association meeting last night, and we were supposed to get a presentation from basically a salesperson from a company. We had some technical glitches, so we didn't actually learn much about them. But any experience? Anybody in the group waterless boat wash stations?
Yeah, I can speak on that. There are a couple of those units throughout the Finger Lakes. I'm happy to chat more about it. I think I have a lot of thoughts about them. I think that they can act as a good supplement to what programs like watercraft steward programs are providing the region in terms of education and outreach. I think there are avenues to make it work. I think right now, regionally, we just lack a full understanding of their possible impact. And I mean, they're pretty new generally as well. So happy to reach out and chat further about them, just because I've met with those folks quite a few times and have a pretty good understanding of what they have to offer. I can give you my own feedback.
This
Great.
is Wanderlick from Cayuga County. I have 2 of them in my county. If anybody wants to talk offline, I'll put my email in the chat.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And Lisa, John Dennis had a question of what are any thoughts as to whether there are links between salinity and aquatic ecosystem health in Cayuga Lake?
So John, you're asking me to take off my watershed manager hat now and put on my research scientist hat, and I'm happy to do that. I do believe that there are, certainly some things we need to pay attention to the salinity in the lake. I mean, Cayuga Lake, Seneca Lake, very unique situations, and I think I'm very happy to know about Clean and Stephanie Redmond's. Looking forward to her presentation, the task force, so that we can all learn more about that from a scientific perspective. And I know that it's a very complicated issue for the watershed. And so I just look forward to learning more about it. But I think it's certainly obviously something we need to be paying even more attention to. And I know it's received a lot of attention already. So thank you.
Thank
Great,
you, Lisa.
thanks, Lisa. And Carrie asked a question about the status of zebra mussels and their impact on the lakes. I don't know, Sam, if you got any zebra mussel updates for us?
Not really updates at this point. I think really the current state of it is folks looking more specifically at what the presence of zebra mussels has to do on the more emerging water quality problems, like things like abs. But no, they've been around for a while and their populations are pretty well understood. And also I would say the quagga mussels is becoming more and more of a problem in Finger Lakes as they, continue to outcompete and establish themselves deeper than the zebra mussels.
Great, thanks. And I know Rebecca put a question in the chat to me, but I'll just kind of ask it. I don't know if anyone from DEC is actually on here, but just how are your connections with the state, with DEC, and what are the I guess just like not the day-to-day, but just working with DEC, how's that relationship work for your different organizations?
Darby, I'd be happy to answer on that one.
Yeah,
I think one of the things that's great is that there is a development of a Finger Lakes action agenda at this point. And so there's opportunities to provide input for the goals of the programs that the action agenda is going to address. And it's very much based on the Great Lakes action agenda. So I would, please take a look at that and be in touch with the hub. They've been good partners, and there is a means to weigh in with some ideas on how to move some of these programs forward.
Great, thanks. If there are no more questions, I'm gonna say end of that session so that we have 30 seconds to transition to the next set of speakers. So thank you, Sam, Lisa, Liz, good kickoff to this group. And for folks there are some email addresses in the chat if you want to find those, and Grayson Scheidman from the CSI put the HABS database in the chat. So grab information from there if you need it. If you need to know how to copy things, like right below the little message, there are 3 dots, or like the speech bubble, the reactions, and then if you click more, you can click copy. I found that to be a helpful tool recently that I forgot how to do. So appreciate everybody being here. And with that, we're going to kick off the next set. Welcome to session 2 of the Cayuga Lake and water quality, and our first speaker, who I have not given permission to do anything yet. So hang on, Rebecca. I
Yep.
need, you can speak. All right, I'm gonna make you a co-host, and we'll do that with others. So hang on while I manipulate my little hands here and find Rebecca.
Uh-huh.
Oh no, where'd you go? There you are. All right, I am gonna make you a co-host so you can turn on your screen and you
Okay.
can share or turn on your
I
video.
can't
if
turn
you
on my
choose.
video. Can you turn on my video for me?
You should be able to now.
Okay. Let's
Yes.
see.
Hopefully.
Let's see that. And now let me see
There
what
you
you're
are.
looking at. Are you, hold on.
Yep.
Are you actually seeing the full screen?
We're seeing just the PowerPoint. You need to put it in this to presentation mode.
Okay. And
I'm
are you
sorry.
looking at the slide or are you looking at my text?
We're looking at your notes, so you need to
Okay.
somehow swap that.
Yeah.
There's some
Hang on a sec.
magic to do that.
Let's see. Stop your screen. Stop share. Share your screen. And I want to share that. Share. Okay, how's that?
That's great.
All right, great.
All right, I'm gonna cut you off at 10:41.
Okay, so thanks a lot. I'm delighted to be here. I looked at what the title and the goal of the conference was, and so I'm looking at what are solutions for local communities, and I'm working in the framework of within their watersheds, what can they do to better protect water resources from climate impacts? Okay, did it change? Good. Just as a starting framework, so we're all on the same page, precipitation basically follows 2 paths when it falls into your watershed. If the soil surfaces are compacted or impervious, then it rapidly moves as surface runoff downslope to the streams and lakes. But if the soil is porous, then rainwater infiltrates to the ground, it moves slowly subsurface and then ends up in streams and lakes. So we have changed the balance of what happens to water in our watersheds. Pre-development, there were tree canopies which intercepted rain, porous soils, all of which encouraged infiltration, and the groundwater pathway dominated in our watersheds. With all the development, we've cleared trees, compacted the soils, and covered the landscape with impervious surfaces, all of which shifts the balance towards runoff and less groundwater. So I have 4 points I want to make just briefly. They're overviews of where communities can make a difference acting locally, but I'm happy to overview those and we can answer questions. And these would be great topics for conferences. You heard about different groups can provide conferences. All right, let's start with that runoff component. Many of you have heard me talk about roadside ditch networks, which crisscross the landscape and discharge into streams. The cumulative research shows they capture 22% of all surface runoff in these watersheds here. They shunt it very quickly to streams. They contribute significantly to flooding. They transport pollutants, sediments, de-icers, nutrients, microbes, and they increase in-stream bank erosion. There are a suite of solutions available. Disconnecting ditches from streams will reduce the flooding and diverting it to infiltration basins or constructed wetlands or other structures. Revegetating after scraping, so the vegetation intercepts sediment and also holds the sediment from eroding. And using check dams can slow flow. We don't want to be creating erosive V-shaped ditches. We really need to avoid these overly deep ditches that more and more highway staff are doing because they actually, along with being unsafe, they capture a lot of groundwater and make more water flow through. And we want to work to stop routing tile drains to ditches. All right, the second theme is about the groundwater piece. So once it rains, it goes into the ground, infiltrates, and builds up underground, and that's groundwater. It flows slowly, but it ends up in our streams and our lakes. So groundwater is actually in streams when it's not raining. That's groundwater coming into the streams. It's called base flow. On average, 50% of all water in our streams across the U.S. is groundwater. One key way it's really important in terms of climate change is that groundwater is the temperature of the average air temperature year-round. So in the summer, it's cooler. One way it's helping to reduce warming impacts is that it helps to buffer the temperature in our streams and rivers. And so that bottom figure is actually temperature of water over the course of a year and a half. The brown line is the stream temperature, and the purple line is the groundwater temperature. So think about that as this buffering capacity, and we really want groundwater to be coming into our streams and maintaining flow and keeping it cooler. A second way is that groundwater transports nutrients into the shorelines of lakes. These are findings from our doctoral student, Dr. Maria Solis-Bode, who defended just a month ago. And what she documented was in Oneida Lake, groundwater is constantly coming in along the entire shoreline that's about 60 miles around, and it's bringing in dissolved phosphorus, which can actually be one of the contributing factors to toxic algal blooms. And what you're seeing is there are high concentrations and loads of phosphorus coming in throughout the summer. The pink is the percent of phosphorus coming in by groundwater, and the gray in the right-hand graph is due to the stream, and it's actually can exceed the amount coming in from the total streams. And so groundwater is a key piece in the whole puzzle, what's happening with our nutrient budgets in our lake. So what's the solution? We really need communities to start thinking about aquifer monitoring and protection programs, thinking about septics, which are above the aquifers. We need to focus on lakeshore management to reduce pollution from septic systems and lawn care. And Sam earlier had a slide in mentioning using fertilizer-free, phosphorus-free fertilizer, and I think Liz may have as well. A key piece to this, or a little tool for this, is that if you can keep vegetative buffers along our streams, that especially the small headwater streams that are about 60% of all the streams, that those overhanging canopies are very effective at shading and cooling the water. Most of these streams are not protected by any rules. If you want to see an example, the town of Ulysses has a code in place that's been very effective in streamside protection. The third one I want to focus on is one I don't study or do research on, but I'm paying a lot of attention to, and that's really the importance of maintaining forest cover on steep slopes. Tree roots are the key to preventing slumping and landslides and heavy rains. Both the fibrous root network binds to the soil particles, like gluing them in place, and the deep roots penetrate and anchor into the bedrock. This issue is becoming increasingly important with the increase in frequency and magnitude of torrential storms. So there was 12 inches in Vermont in July. It was there when this was happening. We then had 11 inches in Massachusetts a week ago. And so this is increasingly occurring, and it's going to contribute to more of instability in our slopes. So we need to manage steep slopes to prevent slope failure. You can zone to limit development density on steep slopes, and you can require greater tree cover be maintained. My last point is that these watersheds cannot absorb these incredibly intense storms, and we are going to have more of them, and flooding is going to occur. The streams and rivers, they can handle the flooding, but it's people who can't. So we really need to move people and infrastructure out of the floodplains. And remember, those floodplain vegetations and ecosystems, they can handle, they'll be just fine. That map on the left shows you all the former channels of the Mississippi River. It moves around, they're naturally dynamic. So we really need to think about, wherever possible, getting away and let the system flood. That's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Rebecca.
We'll
just move right on. Well, like I said, the Q&A will be at the end. All right, we got Andy up. I see your face, and you want to go ahead and share your screen or do whatever you're going to do.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm just get this PowerPoint up. Great. Are you seeing hopefully a slideshow?
Yes, looks
Great.
like you got it. Looks good.
Well,
thanks.
Well, good morning. I'm going to provide a brief overview of a stream restoration project the Finger Lakes Land Trust recently completed on the west side of Cayuga Lake. And this was through a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their Partners for Fish and Wildlife program, which is a terrific program based out of their office in Cortland, New York, as well as involving the Seneca County Soil and Water District and funding from the state DEC. Just first a bit about the Land Trust. We are primarily a land conservation organization working in 12-county region where we've protected about 30,000 acres through establishing nature preserves, holding conservation easements, and partnering with other nonprofits and government to use these tools, particularly adding a lot of land to state conservation lands. But with the emergence of and concern about harmful algal blooms, we're also getting involved in restoration and what I call plumbing projects of trying to figure out how to address a lot of the issues Rebecca highlighted, particularly with increasing intensity of storm events, how to restore vernal pools and wetlands, and also detain stormwater so that it goes back, more goes into the groundwater and not surface runoff. Our site where we worked is called the Van Riper Conservation Area. It's up in the town of Romulus in Seneca County. You see it's the wooded area in the center of the slide. What attracted the land trust there was not the stream. It was the fact that it is an uninterrupted 2,000 feet of wooded shoreline. So through 3 acquisitions, we've secured in a fairly agricultural landscape, approximately 100 acres of shoreline forest, as well as a ravine that is located there. And like a lot of the Finger Lakes, it hosts a small stream that flows into the lake, runs almost dry in the summer. And this was a site where here it's a forested natural condition, but I'm going to show you in a second what was happening there was severe erosion. And I'm going to jump back because what is typical in the Finger Lakes in many areas is a state highway running in close proximity to the lake. And wherever you have slopes, and think before that highway, there was a lot of sheet flow of runoff heading toward the lake. And the highway essentially acts like a dam. So that little stream, based on the highway, culvert is directing much higher flows into that stream than there were historically. And I'm going to show you the result, which is down cutting, because there's all that water and energy that is scouring with these storm events, these soil deposits down to bedrock. So in this particular area, we were losing tons of topsoil into the lake and the nutrients that go with it. And so we had 2 goals for this project. One is to reduce runoff, but also to improve stream habitat. Because given this situation, for much of the summer, it was literally dewatered. It wasn't retaining water as habitat. So we're trying to recreate that natural riffle and pool sequence of a stream. Here's just another view of the preserve and where we focus. Again, a traditional approach would be to dissipate that energy and stabilize through just putting lots of large riprap rock there, but we wouldn't get the habitat quality we were seeking. So it was pretty radical. I am not a stream expert, and this was an education for me. And the first step was you actually have to raise the bed of the stream because it's down cut so much. So based on land surveys of carefully looking at the gradient of the whole project area, and this was done by Jan Dedici of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it was replacing this trench down to bedrock with a series of steps or more natural dissipation of that energy that results in this riffle and pool area. So here you can see the excavator. The first step is to actually raise the stream bed. And then the rock you see are to anchor wood. So we use natural materials. So there is some rock used, but not nearly as much as a riprap project. And the contractor, who was really an artist, was using this heavy equipment to put in a series of anchored logs to create the riffle and pool. And this is the result. So what you see is this series of steps, essentially. What you can't really notice is that each of these logs is tipped, so it flows to create a sinuous pattern like a natural stream. Again, the goal is dissipating the energy, creating the riffle and pool. And it's kind of amazing to see a guy with that heavy equipment actually cant these individual logs to create that pattern. This was immediately after construction. And you can see the pools a little bit. Within just a matter of days, we saw frogs and amphibians using the site and increasing in number. Also significant for invertebrates because, again, the stream was essentially running dry much more frequently. In this case, here's another view. We did have to go back after the contractor to fill holes. There were voids so that the goal was to get it to flow over these logs. And as particularly leaves, debris fills in the gaps. But at first we did have to go and plug some of these because it would flow underneath, what we wanted to be the stream bottom. This is something we're carefully monitoring because it has gone through some significant rains. It's now about 1.5 years into the project, but this does not mean that in a 8-inch rain event that this will necessarily, withstand all that. But thus far, indications are good. And we also have planted the site because though it's forested, the process did open it up. And this is an area we find near the lakes. There are these forests, which are small fragments and surrounded by agricultural land, typically have a number of invasives, including multiflora rose, bush honeysuckle. So we actually actively plant and defend those areas from the deer, because in our experience in restoration plantings, if you do not protect from the deer, they'll get eaten. This is the site as of last fall. This was a low water situation. You can see a little water in the pool to the left, but the site is stabilized. The plantings are growing in. We're pleased with the results. This was about a $40,000 project, so it is a significant expense. And we did it as particularly driven by a desire as a demonstration project, because again, what we see around the region is addressing these situations primarily through rock riprap. And we think this is a better approach. Fish and Wildlife has done similar projects in Northern New York and other areas. They're a great resource. We're trying to spread the expertise too, because there aren't many contractors who've done this work. But we're pleased with the result, and we plan to do additional work elsewhere. And then again, monitoring this on an ongoing basis. As we do projects like this, we're also trying to engage New York State DOT and other highway departments to look at addressing the underlying issue too, though, of as roads are reconstructed over time, how to minimize this funneling effect that is a big part of the problem, where with the original development of the road, you're radically increasing flows through some of these small streams because of just a limited number of culverts. So that's a brief overview, and we're learning as we go. And this site is accessible to the public. If you go to our website, fllt.org, you can find and preserve, and this site is actively located no more than 200 yards or 150 yards from the parking lot on Route 89. So with that, I'll hand it off to the next, and happy to answer any questions later.
Great, thanks so much, Andy. Appreciate information, and yeah, highly encourage people to visit that site if you haven't been there yet. And next up, we have Grace Haynes from the Community Science Institute. And Grace, you are welcome to proceed. We see your presentation.
Great, everyone can see it?
Yeah.
Can you still see it? It's full screen now?
Well, you have it in the notes view.
Okay. How about now?
That's it, you got it.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you about monitoring water quality with Community Science Institute. I'm Grace Haynes. I'm the Outreach and Programs Coordinator at Community Science Institute, and I am also the Cayuga Lake Harmful Algal Bloom Monitoring Program Coordinator. Oh, shoot. Great. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about our organization, and then I will get into some ways that community science efforts led by Community Science Institute local efforts have been implemented for a better climate future. So Community Science Institute is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We were founded in the year 2000, and we're also a certified water quality testing lab. That means that our results can be used for regulatory purposes. Most of the water that we test in this lab comes from our 4 volunteer water monitoring programs, which will be the focus of today's talk. Once we have the results from those programs, we store them in our public water quality database, which lives online and is free and accessible for anyone to use and learn from. And then we do things like outreach and education. We have free summer programming for kids every year, and then we also do talks such as this one. And all of this is in service of our mission, which is to empower community members to protect water through volunteer stream and lake monitoring. So basically, our goal is to give community members the tools to be able to understand how good water quality is determined, and also to foster connections between our volunteers, between the community and the watershed. Oops. So this map shows all of our active monitoring sites as of 2022. For anyone who's not from the area, can you see my mouse? Maybe not. Okay. Ithaca is located at the base of Cayuga Lake. And then I also want to acknowledge all of our really generous funders, many of whom are municipalities who really make this monitoring possible. And yeah, so I'll get started and talk a little bit about each of our different monitoring programs and some ways that the data from them have been used to support a better climate future. I'll start with our synoptic monitoring program. In this program, volunteers go out to different creeks or a particular part of the lake all on the same day, and they collect water samples, which are then sent to Community Science Institute's laboratory. So you can see one of our volunteers here pictured on the right, collecting water samples from one of our monitored creeks. And we monitor for many, many water quality indicators, all of which are listed here. And all of those are really important for understanding water quality, but the ones that I'm going to focus on today are E. coli bacteria, which is an indicator for other types of pathogenic bacteria contamination in waterways, and nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. Now, nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus are really important for all living things, but when we see them in too high of concentrations in our waterways, they can lead to excessive growth of algae, aquatic plants, and cyanobacteria, and ultimately lead to some degradation in the water quality. Our volunteers have collected E. coli data that have been used in some cases to demonstrate contamination, but in other cases to demonstrate a lack of contamination. So here in this map, you can see basically the southern portion of Cayuga Lake. In red, we have the southern end specifically highlighted. And up until 2014, the southern end was listed as impaired for pathogenic bacteria by the EPA. That changed in 2014 when data collected by CSI volunteers were used to demonstrate that there was not, in fact, excessive pathogenic bacteria. And at that point, the southern end of Cayuga was removed from that list. Kind of on the opposite side, CSI data demonstrated that there was excessive pathogenic bacteria in Trumansburg Creek, which the watershed of it is highlighted in purple here, a little further north. So in 2016, this ultimately led to the renovation of the Trumansburg wastewater treatment plant, kind of based on data collected by CSI volunteers. And an interesting kind of follow up to that is the data that our volunteers have collected since then has demonstrated that since this upgrade, we have not seen any excessive bacteria in the Trumansburg Creek. Now, if we look at nutrient data, once again, we have this map demonstrating much of the southern portion of Cayuga Lake. Here we have some additional sub-watersheds from various creeks highlighted and labeled. Nutrient data collected by CSI volunteers has been used for a number of different things, but the two that I'll highlight today are first, in 2011, CSI data demonstrated that there was more phosphorus coming in from non-point sources, such as runoff from streams and lakes, in the southern end, which is again highlighted in red. There's more phosphorus coming from non-point sources than coming from point sources. Point sources are something like a single origin, like a discharge pipe. In 2019, CSI data were used in a publication that compared the nutrient loading from the northern tributaries, which are highlighted here a little further north, on Cayuga Lake, compared to the nutrient influx from Fall Creek, which is highlighted further south here in purple. Now, how does this connect to a better climate future? As Andy mentioned, with these greater and more unpredictable stormwater flows, it's really important for us to collect those data to know kind of what to expect. And CSI volunteers collect water quality data both during intense weather like heavy rain or kind of an elevated stormwater event, as well as during base flow events when the water flow is a little bit more normal. So now I'll discuss our biological monitoring program. In this program, volunteers collect about once a year from each stream. You can see in this map all of the locations where we have biological monitoring data. And our volunteers collect water samples that we then identify the benthic macroinvertebrates, which you can think of as stream critters, like those pictured on the left here. And those give us an idea of kind of the overall picture of water quality, because it's telling us who's able to live in this stream. And so this is a really important indicator of kind of longer term water quality. And how this connects to a better climate future is, these organisms can be extremely sensitive to temperature, as well as there can be climatic influences on the water chemistry that can ultimately also impact these benthic macroinvertebrates. So this is also an important way of kind of assessing how climate might impact our water quality. Now, our red flag monitoring program, in this program, we have volunteers who survey water quality stream side monthly using these little kits pictured on the left. They monitor for various water quality indicators that can be a little bit more basic than the water quality indicators we use in our synoptic stream monitoring. Now, this program extends far beyond the Cayuga Lake or the Finger Lakes watershed, which is highlighted in blue on this map. And that's because this program was designed to create a baseline of water quality throughout New York State. So we've had many volunteers, as you can see, from broadly throughout the state. And this program has its roots in the fracking era. So this program was designed prior to the ban of fracking in New York State. And the goal was to understand what water quality looked like before the potential introduction of fracking. Now, because fracking was banned in New York State, these data have never had to be used for that purpose, but they still give us a good baseline of water quality in case similar changes could occur. Now, this connects to the climate future, of course, directly in that its history is related to fossil fuel extraction, but also our volunteers in the Red Flag program are very closely connected to these streams because they look at them monthly. And so they often see firsthand some impacts from elevated storm flow or other potential impacts that could be connected to climate change. Finally, we have our harmful algal bloom monitoring program. In this program, we have various volunteers who survey segments of Cayuga Lake's shoreline. All of the monitored segments from this year are highlighted in green on this map. Now, these volunteers survey weekly. They let us know if they don't see a bloom, but they also let us know if they do see a harmful algal bloom. And then they collect a sample, which we receive at Community Science Institute's lab. And then we share those data. So there are multiple purposes for this program. The first is that it can be a really valuable public health tool. This photo here comes from our harmful algal bloom, or HABs database. And so we update when we receive harmful algal bloom reports, and once we've looked at them in our lab, we update our database in near real time. And we know that a number of local families or recreators use these data to figure out where it might be more safe to currently recreate or swim on the lake. And we also know that many local municipalities are also reliant on this really quickly updated data. And then beyond this public health tool, we're also, we work together with several different scientific researchers who are seeking to understand the patterns and the norms in harmful algal blooms that are very locally focused. And so we're a part of ongoing research as well. And now this, of course, connects to a better climate future, because harmful algal blooms are can be tied to warmer temperatures, which of course we're more likely to see as the climate increases. And just keeping this long-term data set on harmful algal blooms is really important to noticing as the climate changes, what pattern changes or patterns in general are we likely to see in the harmful algal bloom occurrence on Cayuga Lake. That's all I have for today. If you would like to get involved, we are always looking for volunteers. You can reach out to us at info@communityscience.org or by calling us. We would love to receive any donations that you can email to us or mail to us or submit on our website. You can also explore Community Science Institute's data yourself at database.communityscience.org. And then if you'd like to hear regular updates, you can follow us on social media. So thank you so much for the time, and I'm looking forward to any questions.
Great, thanks, Grace. I'm actually going to start with the last question that just came in from Tad about what platform is used to create and maintain the database. I kind of know the answer to that, but
That's a
go
great
ahead,
question.
Grace.
Well, so the coding, I am not primarily the database updater, so this is my best understanding of this, but our the coding is done via Ruby on Rails. And then I believe that the maps that are used are kind of Google Maps based, and so that's why you might recognize some of the map, like the base maps that you'll see on our database from Google Maps pages. I hope that answers that question. I'm happy to clarify if not.
Great, thanks. I'm going to go back to, I see you, Stephanie, with your hand raised, and I'm going to go back up to a couple of the questions that were in the chat. The first one from Tom, I think, is asking Rebecca, what is the impact of industrial level farms / manure on groundwater contamination?
Okay, so this study that I just described that Maria Solis-Boa did for her dissertation focused on measuring groundwater seepage coming into the lakes, and it was multiple years, and it takes a lot of work just documenting that. She did not look, and we have not looked at well data for groundwater contamination in the watershed itself. There's a few studies about that, but so I have not paid attention to groundwater and industrial level farms and manure and groundwater myself yet. We have looked at it in terms of roadside ditches, and we are paying attention to that issue. And that's why I mentioned tile drains as a kind of connecting system for where manure is spread. Do you want me to answer the other groundwater one?
Sure, go ahead. Unless, Andy, did you have anything to follow up on that question?
No, I always look to Rebecca to answer that question.
All right, yeah, it's great. The other question was from Dylan. Let me just read it for folks. Was it surprising to see a considerable phosphorus load to Finger Lakes from groundwater? Did you look at groundwater well data across the watershed? If so, did phosphorus concentration align with particular land uses?
Okay, so phosphorus, people tend to pay attention to it coming in tributaries like during storms because it bonds so well to sediment. And so our general thinking is, oh, phosphorus is coming in largely that way. what we tend to measure is called soluble reactive phosphorus. And like in groundwater, that's pretty low. So that's what we usually pay attention to. What was surprising is when you look at total phosphorus, which is what we usually measure attached to sediment, it's coming in groundwater, not attached to sediment. And it's in such high levels, it's like sometimes it was half or more of all the phosphorus coming in. People usually think soluble reactive phosphorus is what algae can use. And that's why that's where, oh, there's not much there, or that's the part they pay attention to. But there's new studies that show algae actually can put out like extracellular enzymes that break down and make accessible that total phosphorus coming in. So to see that larger quantity is important. And yes, we definitely saw concentrations were higher associated with like residences just along the lakeshore. Could be septics, could be lawn fertilizers, could be other things. So, I mean, not a lot has been done looking at groundwater into lake shores. It's kind of like this area that's just been kind of overlooked, but it's important. So when we're talking about HABs, this might be kind of a piece of the nutrient source that we really had not looked at previously.
Great, thanks. And let me go to Stephanie Redmond. You have your hand raised. You can unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. My question is for Rebecca Schneider. I know that there's a pilot project that you've been working on in Ulysses, considering the ditch management issues and disconnecting the ditches from the streams. I'm wondering if you can give an update on that. Is that under, is it being implemented? Is there any success or, knowledge that's been gained from that? And is that going to potentially spread out to other municipalities? And a similar question for Andy with the project that he mentioned in Newfield. Is there going to be other municipalities getting that kind of attention from Finger Lakes Land Trust?
So the one in Ulysses was started, Erin Norris actually, as was mentioned, did a really good job. She got that thing up and running and working with our town supervisor. Got as far as the design stage. It's not past that yet. Erin stepped down and I'm actually on sabbatical for 6 months working on a grassland restoration project. So it's kind of slowed down in its progress. There was a different project down in Shenango County, which was successful. We are promoting these. It does take, as Andy mentioned, when you actually start a project, it needs somebody, it takes a ton of work. And so these are engineering projects. And so, it's not just, I'm good at like, here's where you need it. We've highlighted this ditch needs work. This is one of the ones that's eroding and causing problems, but then to get it to the next stages is a whole nother thing. So we have examples across the state of successful projects. That one's just kind of on slow back burner right now.
And to follow up what the Land Trust is focused on, we do not have another stream segment identified at this moment that we would like to do another project. Part of it is where you control enough, like that you feel that it'll be a successful project, and also it's in need. What we are doing though is right now we have 2 stream buffer projects, and I just want to flag, as Rebecca mentioned, the importance of that planting a tree is easy. Planting a tree to get to 10 years old is a little more work. So we're cautious too, as we take on a number of these, that between deer, defending against the deer, and competing invasive vegetation that generally grows at double or triple the rate of whatever you want to grow, that's a significant commitment across the region. So we're doing 2 of those. And then our next project, which we've been actually thwarted on, is a road ditch runoff detention project in the Skaneateles Lake watershed, where the issues come up actually of legal liability of maintaining the detention basin, where we don't have trucks and backhoes, but in this case, the local municipality has actually been sued by improper culvert maintenance. So they're very cautious about what they're taking on, and in a past flood event and damage. So we're for anyone from the region though, we're very interested in lining up more projects, and not always associated with our land. So we're going beyond where we're actually doing land conservation work.
Thanks, Andy. We got 1 minute left. I actually have 2 questions, I think, for Andy. One was both in the chat. How effective would additional culverts be in terms of reducing the funnel effect? And Rebecca, you might have some thoughts on that too.
I think it depends on the specifics of the site and how it relates to road ditch networks. And this is where I think a statewide need, and beyond that even, is understanding how we've altered these watersheds through all these road-related drainage systems, whether it's culvert ditches. And it's challenging because you have connections between multiple jurisdictions being town, county, and state, but it's a significant need. And I don't think you can generalize on those issues without knowing the characteristics of the site and the infrastructure that's there. And I defer to Rebecca on this as well.
I'll just back that up. It's really each one, you have to map the ditches, all right? You have to map the ditch system. Like Andy said, it's been replumbed. And so in order to know what's causing the problem, why there's all this extra flow, you have to know, well, where it's coming from and what did they do with the ditch network and what's with the land use? I mean, has it all been cleared and now there's more water running off and there's not the trees to absorb it? So for each system, you have to kind of map the little drainage basin that's contributing to it and identify what are the key problems. It could be more impervious surface. It could be the ditch network. So mapping the ditches and getting the highway guys to do that is where we've put a lot of effort to try and give, like, guys, you got to know where your ditches are coming from and how they're contributing. But that's not happening. And most, we did a study across New York State, maybe 25% at the most are doing that.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. And a quick yes/no answer, Andy, from Carrie. Did the Finger Lakes Land Trust have a grant from the Fish and Wildlife Service for the Van Riper project? How was that funded?
The three sources were U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in kind through expertise, state grant from a water quality protection grant, and then private matching funds.
All right, and I've run out of time to ask because we have to move on to the next set, but Grace, there was also a question about the relationship between ammonia in the atmosphere and HABs. If anybody has an answer for that, put it in the chat, all right? So thank you, Rebecca, Grace, Andy, appreciate your time on this. And for anyone who's local and sticking around, I'm hoping we can catch up with some of these folks at the events tonight and tomorrow night, so save your questions for then. So I'm going to quickly, I got myself 2 minutes behind, move on to the next session. And Damien Helbling, whose last name I can never pronounce, is here. And there he is. And I've made you a co-host, Damien. So you are able to unmute yourself. You've got your screen on or your video on, and you can go ahead and share your screen. You got it.
Great.
Take it away.
Okay, thanks, Darby, and thanks to the organizers for organizing this, and for all of you for being here and having interest in these topics. So the topic for me today is on per and polyfluoroalkyl substances in water. It's a mouthful. It's commonly referred to as PFAS, and colloquially as forever chemicals. And so the goal of my presentation is to kind of address a number of frequently asked questions that I get on this topic of PFAS. So the most commonly received question is, well, what are PFAS? And I'm not going to go into a lot of chemistry in this presentation, but I will show this one molecule as an example of a PFAS. For those of you that recall your chemistry, there's an alkyl carbon chain that's kind of the backbone, and then all of these Fs are fluorine atoms. And according to the OECD, which is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, a PFAS is any molecule that contains at least one fully fluorinated methyl group or one methylene carbon atom. So these groups highlighted by these red boxes are all it takes for a chemical to be classified as a PFAS. And so my point here is that PFAS aren't a single chemical. It's not even a few chemicals. It's a class of chemicals, and there's actually a large number of them. So another question I receive from time to time is, well, how many are there? And so if we take that OECD definition and submit it into the PubChem classification browser that contains all known commercialized chemicals, it's like 6.5 million chemicals. And that's as of earlier this week. I did this check a couple of months ago, and it was like 6.3 million. So in the course of a month, we get about 100,000 new chemicals that actually could be classified as PFAS. So this is this is rather overwhelming. So how many of those PFAS might we be interested in when it comes to environmental health and environmental quality? And I would whittle that number down to about 5,000. This number comes from a public list that NIST maintains. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, of about 5,000 chemical structures that are identified as PFAS that they suggest should be of interest to environmental health and environmental quality. So it's not 6.5 million, but it's really a lot of chemicals that meet that OEC definition and are expected to accumulate in the environment in one way or another. So why are there so many PFAS? Why are there 6.5 million chemicals that are classified as PFAS? Well, it's an interesting story. So I've done a little bit of research and I've learned that there are very few naturally occurring organic molecules that contain a fluorine atom. There's like a handful of known molecules. One of them was discovered like in a deep ocean trench in the Indian Ocean. A sponge that lives down there actually creates this metabolite that is an organic molecule that's fluorinated. So they're very rare molecules until humans learned how to attach fluorine atoms to organic molecules. And that was really a breakthrough in a lot of ways, because fluorine atoms are very special. They impart very special characteristics to organic molecules. And so in the bottom in green, I'm highlighting some of the features that make fluorinated molecules really useful for industrial and commercial applications, including their thermal stability, also chemical stability. They also have surfactant-like properties, and they can be water, stain, oil, and grease repellent. So they have a remarkable sort of suite of properties that make them useful in a variety of products as shown in this diagram. So some of the main products that are often considered when you're thinking about PFAS are firefighting foams, but also food containers like pizza boxes, a variety of personal care products, and also a variety of textiles, including clothing and furniture and carpeting. Anything that we want to resist stains or water or grease will often have PFAS as a constituent. So how do these man-made fluorinated molecules known as PFAS enter the environment? Well, I guess there's multiple pathways. The first two that I'd highlight are for firefighting exercises and for industrial manufacturing, whether you're manufacturing PFAS for another process or whether you're using PFAS in your manufacturing processes. Those are sort of direct point sources of PFAS into the environment. Of course, there's a lot of domestically used products that contain PFAS. And so the solid waste often ends up in a landfill, and those landfills tend to leach PFAS. And the wastewater ends up at wastewater treatment plants where PFAS can either be emitted as part of the effluent or accumulate in biosolids that are ultimately land applied in agriculture. And so there's those two sort of indirect ways that PFAS can enter the environment. The topic of the session here is about water quality in Cayuga Lake. So what about water quality in Cayuga Lake and PFAS? This is a GIS map that a student working in my lab generated over the summer that highlights all of these putative sources of PFAS. For example, these red flames are fire stations, the triangles are wastewater treatment plants, and so on. So these are all putative sources of PFAS throughout the Finger Lakes region, and we would expect to uncover a variety of PFAS types at sites adjacent to these locations and perhaps elsewhere. So what's the risk? Why do we even care about this? Well, in the ecotoxicity world, or in the human public health world, we often refer to things as PBT. Chemicals that are persistent, bioaccumulative, or toxic are of particular concern. PFAS, by their very nature, are extremely persistent. They're designed to resist a variety of harsh conditions in industrial and commercial processing. So they are also very persistent in the environment. They're bioaccumulative. They bioaccumulate in strange ways. They tend to accumulate in blood, in brain, in kidney, and in liver tissue. So that's kind of unique to this class of molecules. And unfortunately, a large number of them have been demonstrated to be toxic. With respect to risks to humans, this map kind of shows that very clearly. It's most often linked to things like thyroid, liver, kidney, testicular diseases, but there's also epigenetic issues that are rather confidently associated with exposure to PFAS. So essentially, there can be in utero effects that result in health outcomes for babies. So they're of significant concern for both those that are exposed and to potential offspring. Primary exposure mechanism is often through drinking water. And so in March of 2023, the US EPA proposed a national primary drinking water regulation for 6 PFAS out of the 6.5 million, or that reduced number of about 5,000 that maybe we should be thinking about with respect to environmental exposures. The usual suspects are PFOA and PFOS, and those are going to receive maximum contaminant levels in drinking water of 4 parts per trillion, which is 4 nanograms per liter, which is really an unbelievably low level that is linked to their toxic effects at very low concentrations. So how can we deal with this risk? If there are PFAS in our water, what can communities do? And so there's sort of 2 scales to answer that question. On the left, there are a variety of emerging technologies that municipal scale water treatment plants can implement to remove PFAS from drinking water. The plant here on the left is a reverse osmosis plant, but also granular activated carbon has been used at a number of municipalities around New York State to address this PFAS problem. And then when it comes to point of use systems, there are really 2 that have been demonstrated to be the most useful at the household scale. One is what's shown here, this sort of 2-stage filtration system, but individual house scale reverse osmosis systems have also been demonstrated to be rather effective at removing PFAS from drinking water. So there are technologies available to protect the public from exposure to PFAS in drinking water. So that's what I wanted to share during my time. If you want to learn more about what we do, you can probably just Google Helbling Research Group. This QR code will also link you directly to our group website. We're pretty active in this space of PFAS, including studies that focus on source allocation and source attribution, along with novel treatment technologies. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody about those, either in the 10-minute session after this or offline in the coming days. Thank you so much again, and I will pass the baton to Todd.
Great, thanks, Damien. And Todd, you are up. Oh, you got to unmute.
All right. So thank you, Darby, for the invitation to speak here. I'm going to talk about septic systems. It's one of these chronic problems that we've been dealing with for decades, and we've made a lot of progress in figuring out, like, what is, in bulk, the contribution of septic systems to water quality problems. But it's really hard to fix the problems because it's hard to know which septic systems are problematic. Maybe they all are. And so what we've done is we've been working with using synthetic DNA as a way to track the effluent or the leachate from individual septic systems. And so let me just give you a crash course here on DNA. We chose this, and I have to give credit here to Dan Lowe. He's a professor at Cornell University at the biomolecular lab, who does a lot of nanotechnology stuff with synthetic DNA. And he said, this is a great substance. This is something that has evolved in our environment, so it's essentially environmentally friendly, despite Jurassic Park. It's relatively stable, at least in the terrestrial environment. And there are so many variations relative to other tracers. Normally what we would do is we'd say, oh, we think we have a septic system problem, and you go put a dye down somebody's toilet and see if that's a problem. But that's a one at a time type of thing. You have to do that dye with one guy's toilet, another, and it takes forever to find where a problem is, or if everybody's a problem. So DNA gives us lots of flexibility in that sense. And so here's the way we think about it. Don't think about DNA as a genetic compound. We think of it as a genetic compound. It has these 4 compounds, A, T, C, and G. And think of DNA then as a barcode, in which each one of those compounds is essentially a different size bar in a barcode. Okay, so these are just simply compounds we put in the environment, and we can read them in pretty high precision. And the other thing that's nice is we can engineer these DNA strands, so they have no genetic function, at least that we know of. So we're using synthetic DNA. We're not like going and getting Tyrannosaurus Rex DNA and putting it down toilets or anything. And they're also, well, anyways, moving right along here. So the way what we actually do is we take the DNA and we wrap it up in a polymer. Basically, it's the same. If you get sutures that dissolve automatically, it's the same compound that we're using to wrap this DNA up, just to give it a little extra protection from the environment. We can also then control the degradation rate, the surface properties, the size of these things. It gives us a little more control in the engineering side. So this graph here is showing you the diameter of these spheres that hold the DNA and the percentage that have that diameter. And you can see in this graph here, we have most of our tracers are around 600 nanometers, and there's a little bit of variation. Okay, again, because DNA it's just those 4 bases that you put together, and we usually use like a strand with 100 bases on it. So with that many bases and 100 of them, we can actually make more different types of DNA than there are people on the planet. So we have really as many varieties of these different tracers as we could ever want. So in this set of cartoons here, I've used different colored, whatever these things are, DNAs inside of circles to represent 5 different DNA labels or DNA tracers that we might put into the environment. And because we're able to control them so well, we know they have very, very similar, if not identical, transport properties. But we can distinguish them from each other. Okay, so here's a little stretch of shoreline on Cayuga Lake, and there's some houses on there, and we might be suspecting that there's some contributions from septic systems putting nutrients in the lake. So we can put these tracers then down a whole bunch of different toilets. We literally flush the tracer down the toilet, okay? And then we go out in the lake, close to the shoreline usually, and we collect water samples. We collect them fairly, regularly. And then we take what we get out of those water samples and we run them through a process called quantitative PCR. So this just reads DNA. It tells you whether it's there or not, but even more importantly, it gives you a measure of in what abundance they're there. So in this cartoon here, we see that there are 3 pinks, 2 yellows, and none of the other tracers got there. So we can then take this information, we know where we put these different DNAs, and we say, oh, these are the 2 septic systems that we probably want to focus our resources on if we want to protect the water body from the septic leachate. Check my time here. Okay, I'm doing okay. Okay, so here's just a couple of examples of where we've done this. This was in northern New York. A gentleman earlier was asking about groundwater contributions to or ag contributions to groundwater. This is the part of New York where there's a lot of limestone with big fissures and stuff in it. And so we know that stuff put on the surface gets quickly to the groundwater. And this just happened to be a place where we were asked to do an experiment by the DEC. So this red blob over here on the left side of this map is a house. The gray rectangle is a septic leach field. And then we have a variety of wells. Well 0 is actually in the leach field, and then we have these 3 wells. The DEC was worried about whether the leachate from this guy's house was getting into this wetland. And so these graphs here on the right-hand side are showing you the hours since we flushed the tracers down the toilet, and then the concentration is on the y-axis. And so you can see right in the leach field, we get a whole bunch of peaks happening at different times from 4 hours out to 9 hours. We think those peaks are every time the toilet was flushed or the shower was run or something that kind of flushed water out of the, into the leach field and caused these peaks to arise. If you move down to well 2, which is right on the edge of the wetland, we still see like a distinct peak, but it's much more muted. These tracers have diffused a little bit more, and then we get even more diffuse relationships in wells 1 and 3, which are also on the edge of the wetland. But we're able to use this information to kind of this little teardrop that's red in the left-hand side now is showing you kind of where we think the plume of waste from the leach field is going based on our tracers. Okay. And we also, one of the questions was, I mean, this was a matter of like tens of meters. So we also looked a kilometer downstream from this residence and took measurements down there for several days, I think almost a month after we flushed the tracers. And what we see is there's like a peak at around, a little longer than 2 weeks, but the big peak seems to be coming at about a month, and we stopped our study then. But the point here is that we can actually use these tracers fairly far distances from the toilets themselves. We also did this in Georgia. In this case, we were looking at a lake, so we were taking samples at the edge of a lake. Same process, flush the tracer down the toilet and then take samples actually from wells right on the edge of the lake. And again, you can see here, we see fairly distinct signatures of when those tracers are arriving at the lake shore. We did something even more ambitious in the Flathead Lake Basin in Montana. Here we took less frequent samples, but they just want to know which septic systems are contributing rapidly and at high concentrations to the lake and which are not. And so here I've circled our dark blue tracers, which seem to get to the lake quickly and at relatively high contributions relative to the gray dots, which were somewhat delayed and at lower concentrations. And there was actually, I think, one tracer that we never saw in the lake. So that one perhaps didn't contribute at all. But this is the way that we could use this kind of technology. And I hope I haven't gone over. I want to just reemphasize Dan Lowe is really been a collaborator in this, and he knows nothing about watersheds, and I know nothing about DNA. So it's been a really interesting collaboration. And with that, I hope, did I get us on time here? Oh, no, I didn't help us get on time. I'm sorry, Darby. Go to the next person.
All right, Todd, you got it. No, appreciate the information. And yeah, we'll put your questions in the chat if you have them for Todd. And if you can stop your share, we will move on to Doug Barnes, who is my colleague at the Whole Health Department here at the county. Take it away, Doug.
All right, let's see if I pick the right screen. Put it to presentation mode. How's that look?
Looks great.
All right, well, thank you again for this invitation. Thank you all for being here. This is an interesting follow-up then, because what I'm going to be talking about is the kind of basic setup of a septic system and what we've been doing at the county here over the last few years to try to help people replace theirs if theirs have been failing. So, but again, I'm Doug Barnes, and I'm from the Tompkins County Whole Health, from the Environmental Health Division. And so just a real quick background here on how a septic system generically is established, though there are a lot of newer technologies that can set these up a little bit differently, or depending on the soil characteristics at your home, we might have to do something a little bit different. But we approximate about 25% of the homes in America use either a septic system or what we call an on-site wastewater treatment system. And so any of the fluids and solids that get flushed out of your home, the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to get into what's going to be called a septic tank. And this is really the first layer of treatment that's going to happen here. So what we want to do is make sure to the best of our ability that only really water and other dissolved substances can leave the outlet as a leachate or effluent. So hopefully the water can spend enough time in that septic tank so the solids can settle to the bottom, and any oils or greases or fats can float to the top and become what we lovingly call the scum layer, because those things can go out. If they happen to leave the septic tank, they can really plug up the the leach field or absorption area in the soils. And so we don't want those leaving the tank. And so one of the reasons why it's really important that you have your septic tank pumped on a regular basis is we don't want that sludge or scum layer to build up and leave the tank. So if everything's working properly, the bacteria in that tank will have broken down a lot of that organic material and processed it in a way that can then be better processed out in the soils. And so that effluent is going to actually leave and go to what's called a distribution box, because what we want to do is spread it out in the soil into a predetermined area based on the size of the system that you need. And what we're really relying on is the soil to do the final processing of that wastewater. And so ironically, this worked out perfectly because the EPA promotes what's called Septic Smart Week. And so this is Septic Smart Week this year. And so the EPA, and of course, we really promote homeowners to be able to care for their septic systems appropriately. So only putting things down that system that it's designed to do. So no diapers or solid things like that. Really just want typical waste. So the trouble is, though, is because they're underground, it's very easy to forget about these things. And even if your septic system does have a problem, it doesn't always reach the surface. And so like we saw, you can have effluent that's not properly treated can quickly reach surface water or groundwater far enough away from your system. You don't really know it's coming from your home. Dye tests can be used, but they don't always surface near your home, or they can surface far enough away that they become diffuse and they're hard to find. But it is estimated that over 50% of the systems in the nation are 30 years or older, and that 10 to 20% systems are in some sort of failure, which can range from anywhere from a leaky septic tank, or the distribution box has broken down, and so that leachate can't, or that effluent can't make it out to the absorption field. Or at the end, that absorption field itself, the soils have become overloaded with too much use, or there actually is what the bacteria out there do form what's called a biomat. And that's a good thing because that's actually helping to process that water and that effluent. But if that builds up too much over time, then it plugs the soil, and that effluent can then back up into the system. Also, having too many trees in the area, they can grow their roots into the pipes. So there's a whole lot of stuff going on underground that's hard to see. But one of the things that we can do, though, hopefully, is come along and help people replace these. So what we try to do, though, is the trouble is that, of course, these nutrients, if they're not spending enough time in the septic tank or percolating through the soil appropriately, like we've seen, it can contaminate groundwater or reach the surface and contaminate surface water. So we, of course, encourage homeowners to let us know if they're having problems, so we can come out and evaluate the system and get them a permit to replace it. The trouble is, it's very daunting because you have to have somebody come in. Obviously, they do a lot of work at your home, but really, it's a financial burden to many homeowners, because it can range anywhere from $15,000 to $30,000 or more, depending on the type of soils they have, whether they need their septic tank replaced as well. If they have a very small lot, then they just don't have enough land to put in a standard system. So then you have to start doing some other things that just take more work. So what we were able to do, a coworker of mine, she was able to establish what was called a CDBG grant through the Community Development Block Grant. And that was provided by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We started in 2020, and we just finished up here in August. And we had the help. It was managed by Toma Development Consultants in Cortland. And we were awarded $855,000. And what that allowed us to do was help 37 low to middle income families completely replace their failing systems. And so we were able to save those families on average about $18,000 per system. The other grant that we've been managing over the last few years was provided to us by the Environmental Facilities Corporation from the state. The EFC and the Department of Health, what they did was they went through and determined priority geographic areas, and because the lake is a priority water body, we became an area of interest, and so we were able to canvass and look at homes within 250 feet of the lake. The property itself is immediately eligible. A homeowner would then send in an application, and there's further eligibility requirements, whether it's specific distance from the lake of their system, whether their system is currently failing, or the age of the system. All of these things we look at. This particular grant covers up to 50% of replacement, up to a maximum of $10,000 once you determine that your project is eligible. And that one started in 2018, and it's currently ongoing until funds are exhausted. And so up to this point, we've helped offset the cost for 24 projects. But then we have about a total of 25 to 30 more that are in the permitting phase or in some other stage of their project. They just haven't officially started their replacement yet. But that's all I had. So thank you again for your time, and I'll pass it back to Darby.
Great, thanks so much, Doug. And you pulled us back into our time. So we have 10 minutes for questions, and then let me start with the ones that came in the chat from for Damien. The first one from Tom asked what the level of contamination of PFAS is in Cayuga Lake. And if you haven't measured that, I don't know if anyone else in the room has, but go ahead.
So that is another great question that I probably should have included in my list of questions, but I don't have a good answer for it. We have, my lab does do some measurements of PFAS in different types of systems, and we have taken some samples in the area, but I don't have any really strong conclusions I can make. I can tell you that my expectation would be that large swaths of the lake would be free of PFAS, but there would probably be hotspots around the lake in areas adjacent to some of those known sources like wastewater treatment plants, and other types of industrial activities. And so it's something that I'm curious about, and I hope that I can maybe contribute more concrete answers to that in coming months or years. But at the moment, that's the best I can say about that.
Great, thanks. And we also had a question for you, Damien, from John Dennis. Can you say a little about why at many wastewater treatment plants, effluent levels of PFAS tend to be higher than the influent level? So what's happening in that water treatment facility that increases them? And are there alternatives to sending landfill leachate that tend to contain PFAS to wastewater treatment plants?
Great questions. So with respect to the first question about why we often measure higher concentrations of PFAS after wastewater treatment, the reason for that is we often focus our measurements on a select few PFAS, maybe up to a few dozen in some of the most ambitious studies. And those PFAS aren't necessarily the ones that are being used anymore. In fact, PFOA and PFOS, which are those two poster PFAS that I mentioned in my presentation, those have mostly been phased out of use in almost every industry, in every application. The issue is that a large number of the other 5,000 PFAS that are used in commercial products can be transformed by different types of processes, and they tend to be transformed into these more stable PFAS end products like PFOA and PFOS. And so what happens is that in a wastewater treatment plant, a large number of very complex PFAS come into the plant, most of which we actually can't even measure and quantify because we are not sure what their structure is. And then during the wastewater treatment process, they're transformed into things like PFOA, PFOS, and their structural analogs. And it appears that they are well, it doesn't appear, they are formed and therefore at higher concentrations in wastewater effluent. So it's a little bit of a dilemma. I think the second part of the question was about the trucking of landfill leachate to wastewater treatment plants, which I think we all know happens. It happens here at the Ithaca wastewater treatment plant as well. I don't know all of the options for that. All I can say is that it's pretty clear that we have to manage landfill leachate in some way. We have to collect it and dispose of it in some way. And I think a conventional practice is to truck it to municipal wastewater treatment plants. Alternatives that I could think of that I'm not sure how common they are. Number one would be to send it to an industrial wastewater treatment plant instead of a municipal one that might do a better job at removing some things that we would be concerned about throwing into our municipal treatment plants. And another idea that, you know, might not be so far-fetched for the horizon, considering the EPA's action on PFAS in drinking water, might be to start requiring monitoring of PFAS in landfill leachate and perhaps on-site treatment of landfill leachate prior to sending it to a municipal or an industrial wastewater treatment plant. It really is a lot easier to remove PFAS that are present at relatively high concentrations in a relatively low volume of water or leachate than to send it out to a wastewater treatment plant where it's going to be diluted with millions of gallons per day. There can be some efficiency reasons why we would want to treat landfill leachate at the landfill.
Great, thanks. I'm going to jump to a couple of questions for Todd. One was from Grayson asking how willing were homeowners to participate in the synthetic DNA program, and were there any follow-up actions taken once the sources of contamination were identified?
That's a great question. The Georgia study, the only two studies where we actually had to engage the public was the Georgia study and the Montana study. The Georgia study happened in the midst of the COVID pandemic, so we didn't get as much public outreach as we would have liked there. There was no resistance to the program from the people that were asked, but we didn't really get to talk to very many people. In the Montana study, I gave a couple of Zoom seminars and actually went out and visited in person with a couple of watershed groups. And there was actually, I mean, people were really interested and there was some concern, but we actually had more people wanting this done than we could actually, we had the manpower to do. So I think once people understand how the system works, there was enthusiasm rather than resistance. And keep in mind, these are people that love their lakes and they want to know, and they want to know if they're a part of the problem so they can fix it. So that was not an issue. Carrie's question is about whether we couple this with testing for E. coli pathogens and other things. And the answer is yes, we were dovetailed into bigger studies that were doing those types of collections, but they were doing those sorts of analyses because that's what's done in a standard way. And they don't always give a lot of useful information. E. coli is everywhere. Pathogens are everywhere. They're not necessarily linked to septic systems, and there's not necessarily always higher amounts. If you wanted to get to like what the role of septic systems are, you'd want to go to somebody like Damien, who can tell you, are there human pharmaceuticals versus animal pharmaceuticals in the waste stream, and then you get another verification that this is probably a septic source, even though the DNA was flushed down that guy's toilet. But that's where I would go. I mean, these things are important for aquatic health and human health, but they don't give us a lot of extra information.
Great, thanks, Todd. And Damien, another question came in about any suggestions for a county-wide collection of baseline PFAS data from streams. And I don't know, is Grayson still on here? She might be able to have some thoughts on this. Thinking best places to grab samples, timing, frequency, etc. Oh, you got to unmute, Damien.
Yeah, thank you. So the map that I showed during my presentation, we created that map with the explicit intent of applying the information in that map to design a sampling campaign, exactly as you're described. So this is something that we're interested in doing, and it's actually something that we are in the process of doing. We're doing this in kind of a very slow and controlled way. I'm trying to train a team of Cornell undergraduates to do the sample collection and the sample preparation in the analysis in a very systematic and controlled way. That of course also considers things like places to grab samples, timing, frequency, and the types of things you mentioned in your comment. So I anticipate that this time next year, we might be able to actually answer that question, but we need time to kind of get this project up to speed.
Grayson, I think I just allowed you to unmute if you did have anything to add there.
Yeah, I was just going to say if there's any question about, why CSI isn't doing monitoring for PFAS, there's many different reasons. One of which is that the sample collection protocols are a lot more rigorous than sampling for things like nutrients or E. coli. It's not something that would be particularly feasible for a lot of community-based volunteers. Another reason is the cost of certified PFAS testing is just not something that a nonprofit at our size could handle. Tests can be anywhere from $700 to over $1,000 per sample. And so to do, widespread monitoring throughout the county wouldn't be feasible for a small nonprofit like CSI. There are non-certified test options as well, which we are having active discussions about how we could do that in a quality controlled type way. As Damien mentioned, it's really important to keep those things standardized. But I think it's so great that Damien and his lab have identified some good areas for sample collection. I think that's a really important first step rather than just casting a wide net, because as Damien mentioned, there's probably areas of the lake where you're not going to see anything, and then areas where you're more likely to find something. So yeah, thanks, Darby.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Not to throw more people into a Q&A. And it does look like Todd answered George's question about the DNA tracers, and George had a couple other tidbits in the chat about the Jefferson project, and then also noting that we have some fire training facilities along Fall Creek, both upstream towards Etna and then right down in the city of Ithaca. And thank you, Damien, Todd, and Doug, for your presentations. And we're gonna switch over to the next round of water quality and Cayuga Lake talks, and we just have 2 in this session. And first off, we are going to Stephanie Redmond. So take it away, Stephanie.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and try to share my screen. No. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, looks good.
Okay, perfect. My name is Stephanie Redmond. I am the program manager for Cayuga Lake Environmental Action Now, and I'll be talking to you about water quality and road salt. The story of road salt in the Finger Lakes begins about 400 million years ago. As you can see in this photo, from 400 million years ago, the area was covered in an ocean. As the oceans drained, they left 7 salt beds that range from the Hudson Valley all the way into Lake Huron, and they vary in height and quality. There's only 2 beds that are of good quality. There's a number 4 level at 2,000 feet and number 6 level at 2,300 feet underground. The salt thickness in the northern area, or what is now north, in the Tully area, is about 150 feet thick and lies about 1,300 feet below surface. But as you get down further south in this area, the thickness is more like 500 feet thick, and it's about 2,000 or more below below the ground. So it's kind of like if you were walking into the ocean from a beach. It would be, as you're going north to south. So let me go ahead and see if I can advance these slides. There we go. So that kind of gives that slide gives an overview of the area that we're seeing salt in. And this sort of, it's a little bit extreme. It's the slant is not this extreme, but this is a good depiction of how the salt goes from north to south, a little deeper as you go south. So on Cayuga Lake, salt mining began as a solution mining in 1891 at Myers Point, and did not become moved to shaft mining until 1916. At that point, the number 4 layer was being mined, and it was mined until 1968. In 1970, Cargill, which is pictured here, purchased the mine and sank their shaft down to 2,300 feet below the ground. So at this point, with these shaft mines, they basically take what's called the face of a mine, and they put 24 holes that are about 15 feet in depth, drilled into that face, and the holes are filled with explosives. The face is blown, and then front end loaders come in and scoop that out, Currently, the Cargill de-icing facility produces about 10,000 tons per day. So this is what the mine looks like underground. Today, Cargill comprises over approximately 18,000 subterranean acres, or approximately 20 square miles. So our concern with clean is that, as you can see in this slide, you'll see the bedrock there is cut through by the glaciers, and that gouged out this area and created the lakes. So that that composite beam, or that carbonate beam that goes across there is thinner where the gouges have happened. And so it's thinner, of course, protection, let's say, above the mine. So we have measured a lot of salinity from road salt around the area, and we are very concerned. As you can see here, most of the road, or the streams around the area are lower, but if you look at Hillside Ditch there, that is running off of the surface operations of Cargill. And so we have been contacting many different organizations, and our Children's Earth Foundation took up this cause and actually sued Cargill and was able to get a settlement for cleanup of surface operations. However, it hasn't been particularly satisfactory, as we're still seeing significant levels of salinity and chloride coming off of the site. And we are concerned that the speediest outfall that is allowed for the surface operations is actually 40,000 milligrams of chloride per liter, which is about twice the level of seawater. So this depicts a graph produced by John Halfman, who's a wonderful limnologist and has done a lot of work on the Finger Lake studying chloride levels. As you can see here, Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake, which are both the deepest lakes in the Finger Lakes and also have the most salt mining on them, have the highest concentrations of chloride. This is another graph produced by him using both his own data and previous data that was gathered by Dr. Jolly. And so this does not actually depict mining previous to chloride levels from when mining actually started in the area, but it does give an idea of what chloride levels were around that time. You'll see a lot of chloride levels in the 1970s. At that point, there was very little regulation of water contamination issues, and most mining companies were piling their fines and their salt right on the side of the lake or dumping them directly into the lake. And so there was a lot more regulation put in place at that time, and there was a significant drop from those areas or from that time of chloride levels. However, we are starting to see it creep up a little bit now. The reason that we are concerned about this is that the EPA drinking water standard is at 250 milligrams per liter. So of course, 40,000 milligrams per liter is far more than you would see in a freshwater aquatic system. And we see die-off of a lot of aquatic species at that point. Daphnia, for example, which you see right around the 250 milligram point, is a zooplankton that is not a selective feeder and eats a lot of plankton. They cannot be used to control HAB's outbreak because they, much like we are sensitive to microcystis. So in any large quantity, they will see die off from their species as well. So it's kind of a vicious cycle where, if we're killing off zooplankton and we're, increasing nutrients and increasing temperatures, we're creating the perfect storm, and these cyanobacteria are allowed to grow out of control. We are also concerned with the air quality in that area. There's a lot of dust produced from the salt mining operation, and this is a car that is right near, or that was located right near the surface operations there, and the residents near there can literally write their name on their cars with the dust. So it's definitely an air quality issue as well. So we are looking for some mitigation actions. The Adirondacks has a road salt task force, and they recently released a report with all sorts of mitigation ideas or implementation, including changing transportation laws and reducing speed limits when there's inclement weather, changing de-icing technologies, which would of course require some levels of funding so that municipalities can upgrade their road salt trucks and things like that, and do targeted applications for areas that are problem areas. Another solution would be education. A lot of commercial properties just spread road salt, even right up to ditches and streams, with very little understanding of how that's impacting our environment. And then looking at road salt alternatives. I'm also the town supervisor for the town of Enfield, and we use a lot of sand in our road salt, or in our road applications for dealing with ice, but there are other options as well. And increasing our water protection laws, for example, demanding that the speedies permit for Cargill outfall be reduced back to its previous measurements of 250 milligrams would be a great start. And talking to the DEC regulations and making sure that the secret process is adequately taken into account. So this is a slide that has information about our site, our group, and there's the website and the Facebook site. So definitely follow our groups and let us know. I'm going to cut a little bit short because I know that the speakers next are going to need a little more time than I will to talk about the issues that we are now dealing with the Cargill site. So I'll move on to letting go John and Brian take over.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And yeah, Brian and John, you should be able to unmute, share your video and your screen. So go ahead as you're ready.
All right, this is Brian. I noticed that many of the people on this Zoom are people somewhat familiar with this issue. I'll be a little bit more detailed here with people that might not be that familiar. So anyway, you see the campus site where you know, the collection, storage, and processing of the salt takes place. And to the left, next to the lake, you see the rail cars being loaded. Most of the shipment is done by rail, but quite a bit by truck also. And you know, the mining did begin early, and all of the salt mining in the number 4 salt bed was to the east, up the hill and towards Rogues Harbor, several hundred acres. The number 6 salt is exclusively under the lake. So John, move it. John, yeah. So anyway, so as Stephanie said, that, you know, the actual boundary of the mine is about 21 square miles, but the actual voids under the lake is, and most of this is under the lake, is about 6 square miles. And so the cavity volume can hold about 10 to 15 billion gallons. And each day of mining extraction exposes new salt to eventual creation of brine, either in the short term or the long term, because over the long term, this will be completely submerged in water, and much of that will be turning into brine. So the mining continues northward under the thinning carbonate beam, as Stephanie demonstrated. It rises at an angle, and the lake was created by the post-glacial melt and the retreat of the glaciers. The glaciers dug deepest in the center, called the thalweg of the lake, and so in that area, as you go north, the carbonate beam that separates the lake from the mine becomes thinner, and so it's room and pillar mining, and the pillars hold up all of the structure above it, you know, and over time they begin to erode from being exposed to water. Next one, John. So coal miners are exposed to risks from an accidental collapse, and this has happened quite a bit in history, and recently in the Avery Island mine in Louisiana. And then there's lack of the Federal Mining and Safety and Health Administration requires 2 exits. And where they're mining right now, they basically have 1 exit. So the salt mining over time has made Cayuga Lake twice as saline as 9 other Finger Lakes. And an accidental or intentional flooding prior to or subsequent to the mine's retirement may permanently impair this valuable resource. So now we're coming to the slide that is not going to be duplicated by others. I'm sorry that it's this very small. You're not going to be able to read it, but people can contact me to talk about the details in greater, or you can take a screenshot of this. But the State Environmental Quality Review Act wasn't adopted until 1978. So there was no environmental review of mining under the lake. And there was a little interest in it subsequent to it because it was an unseen activity. No one knew much about it. No one was clamoring for an environmental review of the mining. But then in 1994, the only other salt mine in New York State collapsed, and it flooded 18 square miles of cavities. And so this was a threat to the remaining mine, Cayuga Salt Mine, which had a lot of similarities to the Red Soft mine. So in 1995, they had a legislative hearings in Albany about the failure. 1997, Cargill applied for a renewal permit and requested to mine an additional 5,000 acres. This was our only opportunity, our best opportunity to have gotten an environmental impact statement on the site, because all the conditions the criteria that require an environmental impact statement were there, and for whatever reason, and it's partially because of this following reason, is that it wasn't done. And so now we have 30 added years of creating voids and exposing more salt and increasing the salinity of the lake. So the Cargill and DC signed a stipulation agreement, and Cargill said that they did not recognize New York State's jurisdiction to regulate their mining operations. DEC said they disagreed, but they signed an agreement where they both stated their positions. So there was no EIS required, and they did accept an environmental expanded environmental assessment, which was as it turns out, confidential document that would not be shared with the public. The public did attempt to get some of the data in there, the seismological and geological data, and it was refused by the DEC that acceded to Cargill's wishes that it be called trade secret. In 2003, the DEC's administrative law judge recommended that in order to actually participate in an environmental review, you had to have the basic information, and much of the information that had been requested, he ordered be released. But in 2005, the assistant DEC commissioner overruled the ALJ recommended decision. So then there was moving on, there was a lot of interim activities between them, but when they decided to build the shaft, we asked for an EIS again, and that was again refused. And in the meantime, the Ivory Island mine has been closed, and Cargill is now preparing to sell it, even though publicly they have not stated that. They neither confirm nor deny, but it's been in the trade papers, and it's being talked about among people that work there and formerly worked there. So we have good sense that it probably will be. So anyway, John?
Yes, can everyone hear me? I'm guessing you are not hearing me. So
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, we hear you, John.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll take it away. So this is a map of the mine. Some people don't realize, there is an extensive mine. I'll just highlight a few characteristics here. So these are all the purple and red line around the perimeter is permitted salt reserves. Here is one of the first mining tunnels at Cargill. So Cargill, this is the East Mine, which existed for since the 1920s. And then in 1984, Cargill came out in the number six mine, and basically has been mining north ever since. There were attempts to mine south, but every time they began to try to push towards the middle of the lake, they met problems which were never well described. Part of the problem with Cargill is they're a private company and very secretive, and their annual reports to the DC that we're able to foil are sometimes 2 or 3 pages long with sort of formulistic answers. Nothing's changed. It's all the same as last year. But this green area here is a Cargill map of what they describe as an artesian aquifer. They don't say that it's fresh water, but our geohydrologist Andrew Mulchalski believes it is, and that it probably, their map ended right here, this straight line, but Andrew Mulchalski thinks that it probably extends under the city of Ithaca, and that's relevant for 2 reasons. One, a mine collapse might trigger contamination of this aquifer. And 2, if this aquifer begins filling the 15 billion gallons of voids in the mine under the lake, it could dewater the aquifer under the city of Ithaca and result in significant subsidence, just as the collapse at Retzoff in 1994 caused wells to go dry and subsidence to extend more than 4 miles away. City of Ithaca is about 4 miles from the Ithaca Yacht Club, which is the southernmost part of mining to date. And note here, this is about 300 acres of mineral rights. U6 only, maybe mined about 26 of those acres, and then Cargill never came back. So it's quite mysterious that a company would be going more than 6-7 miles to the north to be mining up here, which is where they are now, rather than accessing mineral rights, which are just within a quarter of a mile, half a mile of their plant. These circles, we'll have a more detailed map, are anomalies A, B, C, D, and E, which were mapped by a Cargill consultant in 2010. And these are scour anomalies. So the glacier 10,000 years ago, as it came down, was carving down into what's called the carbonate beam, the strong Onondaga limestone, which is the sort of the major beam, if you will, that's holding things up and preventing a collapse down into the mine. And our John K. Warren is probably the world's most well-known evaporite geologist. He wrote 3 different papers on salt mining here for us, and he's concerned that these are not actually islands, but it's sort of one continuous scour, and that it's, he's expressed concern that it's really not a good idea to be mining near. He thinks there should be 1,000-foot setback from all of them. And here's a case where the DEC is allowing Cargill to mine actually underneath an anomaly. But we'll come back to this map. Here's the Retzoff mine, a diagram. It was not under a lake.
Hey, John, just excuse me for a second. You said you'll come back to the map, but we're out of time on your session. We have a 10-minute Q&A at this point.
We may not come back, but thanks, Darby. How many minutes do I have left?
Negative 1 or 2. But we can, if people want to put in chat in any other questions, we can let John go until I see some chat questions come up. I did. Todd Walter asked about that there, and this is for Stephanie, that there are places in the US where no road salt is used. Is that an option? So think on that, Stephanie, and we'll come back in a minute or 2, but you can keep going, John. But folks, please put questions in the chat if you have them, and I'll cut John off again in another minute.
So Darby, 1 more minute to go. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yes.
I see. So the significant thing here is the rubble chimney went all the way to the surface, and there was just cornfields. There wasn't much up there. The Geneseo River was over here. But in the case of the Cayuga mine, a similar rubble chimney would create a hydraulic connection to the lake. And this is a lake which in 1980, a Texaco drilling rig accidentally punctured the diamond salt mine 1,500 feet below it. And that was a 10-foot deep freshwater lake. Today, it is now a brackish lake. So in other words, and this is about 7 miles from the Gulf of Mexico, a canal sort of reversed flow and brought salt water in. But the residence time in Cayuga Lake is 10 years. So you'd think, well, if suddenly there's a lot of salt water in the lake, it's only 10 years. But this is an example of a lake that has never gotten better. It's now 200 feet deep. There were 11 barges and a drilling rig that went down. 9 of the barges popped back up. Anyway, so Ray Vaughan, our geologist, has calculated that if the mines flood and the mine manager doesn't know whether it will flood or not, this is the concentration of the brine. So roughly 10 times the concentration of seawater. And if that was all vented into the lake, we'd be more than twice, 4 times the drinking water quality. Stephanie's, this is where Cayuga Lake is now, Seneca Lake, and this is if all of the brine in a saturated Cayuga Lake, Cayuga mine volume vented into the lake. This is where we'd be at, roughly 1,000 parts per million. I won't go, I can talk about anomalies on some other date. Our conclusions: close the mine, subject to an EIS to develop a proper closure plan. Cargill should post a $10 billion bond with New York State pending the mining void closure. So Cargill says it could take anywhere from 15 to 20 years, 200 years. And Cargill miners should not be forgotten. They should get lifetime health insurance, retraining, and severance and pension benefits. Lastly, we'd like to invite Cargill to help create and endow a Cargill salt mining museum at Portland Point. And here's our contact information. Donations can be given to our fiscal sponsor, the Chris Dennis Environment Foundation, and that our Venmo is at Chris_Dennis_EF, and a mailing address. Thanks so much for the privilege of talking, everyone.
Thanks, John and Brian. We have 4 minutes for questions for Stephanie, John, and Brian. Stephanie, again, there was a question about, is anyone considering using no road salt altogether? I would love it if we just said, hey, it's a snow day, let's not even drive on the roads, but that might be a little too much to ask. So what do you think?
There are areas of the Adirondacks that they are considering sensitive areas, and they will try to have their pilot projects in which they use no salt in those areas, and reduce speed limits, have special messaging for those times, and then encourage people to drive proper vehicles during that time. Something with 4-wheel drive, something with studded snow tires. So these are the actions that we can take. We do have to consider the legislation too. There are tort laws that could be changed and not hold municipalities liable in situations where a citizen could say they were not properly maintained for ice. And so if we change the laws to be indicative of our need to create, mitigation methods around road salt issues, then I think that would be a way to go forward.
Great, thank you. I've always been curious about the alternatives, like the beet sugars and other things. Do they have then biological impacts downstream? Or I guess I know it's coming at a time when things aren't biologically active, but what are some of the impacts from those? That there's always a trade-off, right?
Well, exactly. If you have a large quantity of anything, we'd have to see what the eventual impacts are of it. If, of course, we started spreading beet juice everywhere at the level that we do road salt, we might find issues with that. So I think that there has to be a lot of research and development around that as well.
Great, thanks.
I might add that in Holland, they use sand, and every spring they go out and vacuum it back up, and then they recycle it and use it for the next winter.
Right, because I know sand can be an issue, especially on the pervious pavement. It can clog the pores that are meant to be draining the water. So I know there's different applications that can be used for sand. Other questions for this group? And I don't know, John, if you want to unshare your screen so people can look around. I can unmute others if we have any questions from the floor. I don't see any more coming in. Ted Yorks, where's your question in this session? You've had one in every one.
Okay, I got one. You ready? So I was just thinking, I'm kind of, I don't know if devil's advocate's the correct phrase, but what's the response to anyone who would have sat, listened to what we just heard, which all makes sense to me, and I'm on board with not mining below one of the Finger Lakes, but the economic implications of closing that mine, and how are we going to maintain the roads without that major source of salt? Because not everybody has sand or we're gonna start to use it.
No, I'll answer that in part. If they had done an EIS in 2000, one of the issues is, are there reasonable alternatives? And at that time, they just switched from mining under land. They owned several thousand more acres of mineral rights under lands. So I think if it had gone through the EIS process, the reasonable alternative would have been preferable. I mean, mining in any condition is not a great idea, but mining under the lake, you're only likely to get a salinization of the lake. Mining under land is safer, but not safe.
But I think it's also useful to say that what I call the little good salt mine in New York actually produces twice as much salt as this mine, which is spread over 11-mile area. So American Rock Salt in 2000 started the Hampton Corners salt mine in Livingston County, so about 60 miles to the northwest. Their workforce over 400 people. They are unionized. They're not afraid to file, injury reports, that sort of thing. So we have a good source of salt mining in New York State, not that far away, that is not under a lake. So, would it be enough for everybody at current rates of usage? It might be a stretch, but it might also be an incentive to find the alternatives more quickly.
Great. And one last question just came in from Tom. Would the mine be likely to flood were it to be closed? So any thoughts on answering that?
Well, I'll speak to that. There is what's called shaft leakage at all 4 shafts, and Cargill reports how much leakage is going on. I think 35 gallons a minute at their shaft 3 is the higher. They actually forgot to report leakage rates for shaft 4 in their 2022 report. We're not sure why. But eventually it probably would flood naturally, but there is a salt mine in Poland that has been there for hundreds of years. It's a tourist site. So there are cases of salt mines that don't flood. And maybe, carbon sequestration, other interesting environmentally friendly things could be done in those voids in the future. So also, as part of the closure plan, Cargill should spend a lot of time studying how to close it smartly, and bringing probably all the foreign materials out of the mine is a good idea, because we have to assume that once that mine floods, the highly pressurized brine will find a hydraulic connection up into the lake and begin venting.
Great, thanks, John. All right, that wraps up the Cayuga Lake and Water Quality Marathon session that we started at 9 something this morning. And thanks to all the presenters, Stephanie, John, and Brian from this session, and others who I see who are still on here. And now's your break. You get a break until 12:30, and I highly encourage folks to attend the panel of Senator Pete Harcum and Assemblymember Deborah Glick, and that is in the auditorium. So if you are struggling with Gather, my recommendation is look for the little calendar in the lower right corner. Click on that. You'll see the events and hit the auditorium, and that'll just walk you over there. So that's about all I know about Gather, since I haven't had to use it today. And thanks all for joining. I'm pausing this, and at 1:30 back here in the blue room will be the flooding and climate change session. So thanks all. I think I'm gonna just end this.
Thanks, Darby.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Darby.